I never imagined the silver laptop on the back seat would be the key to unlocking the hell of my marriage. I only wanted to be a devoted wife, yet I found my husband passionately kissing my best friend in his glass office. They mocked me and chased me away like a stray dog, unaware that the skyscraper they stood in and the future they dreamed of lay entirely in the palm of this useless woman. My name is Elena. At 28 years old, I had mastered the art of being invisible. I worked as a manager in a dusty archive of antique books, a place that smelled of vanilla, glue, and decaying paper, which suited me perfectly. My wardrobe consisted of thrift store finds, beige cardigans, and sensible shoes that had seen better days. I preferred it this way. Silence and simplicity were my armor against a world that often felt too loud and too demanding. I was content to be the background noise in everyone else's symphony, especially in the life of my husband. For 2 years, I had shared my life with Julian, a man who was the polar opposite of my quiet existence. He was the CEO of Apex Stream, a tech startup that consumed every waking second of his life and every ounce of his energy. Julian was breathtakingly handsome, with the kind of sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes that graced business magazine covers. But his ambition was a razor blade that often cut me when I got too close. He treated our marriage like a business merger where he held 51% of the shares, always the superior, always the decision maker, while I was merely the support staff. He was the sun, burning bright and hot, and I was just a cold little planet orbiting him, hoping to catch a bit of his warmth. Then there was Chloe, my supposed best friend since our college days, though lately I felt more like her charity case, if I was a shadow. Chloe was a neon sign screaming for attention. She draped herself in Gucci and Prada, her laughter always a little too loud, her perfume a little too cloying. She had a habit of visiting our small apartment, looking around with a sneer disguised as concern. She would run a finger over my modest curtains and sigh, "Oh, Elena, are you really keeping these? You know, a little style wouldn't kill you. Sweetie, Julian is a CEO now. He needs a wife who looks the part," she would say, patting my arm with a manicured hand. I always smiled and took it, mistaking her insults for sisterly advice, believing she truly wanted the best for me. The morning that changed everything started with the sound of a slammed door. Julian was in a frenzy. Today was the day he had been prepping for months, the Series B funding round that would either launch Apex Stream into the stratosphere or bury it forever. The air in the kitchen was thick with tension. He was pacing, his face flushed with stress, his hands shaking as he adjusted his tie. "Look at this collar. Elena, I explicitly told you to iron it perfectly. Do you have any idea how important today is?" he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. I tried to apologize, reaching out to smooth the fabric with my trembling hands, but he swatted me away as if my touch burned him. "Forget it. You can't even do one simple thing right. Just stay out of my way." He spat before grabbing his keys and storming out, leaving me standing there with tears pricking my eyes, feeling smaller than I ever had before. I stood in the silence he left behind, my heart aching with a familiar dull throb. As I turned to clear the breakfast table, my breath hitched. There, sitting on the placemat next to his half-finished coffee, was his silver laptop, the one that contained the pitch deck, the financial projections, and the entire future of Apex Stream. Panic, cold and sharp, washed over me. He would be ruined without it. My own hurt feelings vanished instantly, replaced by a naive, desperate need to save him. I was his wife, and I had to fix this. Oh no. Oh God. Julian. I whispered to the empty room. I called the library and lied about a family emergency. I did not care about the cost. I hailed a taxi immediately. Summit Plaza. Please? And hurry. I told the driver, my hands gripping the laptop case so hard my knuckles turned white. When the taxi pulled up to the financial district, I felt like a mouse scurrying into a lion's den. Summit Plaza rose into the sky like a needle of glass and steel, piercing the clouds. It was a monument to power and wealth, a world where Julian belonged and I was merely a trespasser. I had rarely been invited here. Julian always said his workspace was for serious people, not for someone who spent her days dusting old manuscripts. I rushed into the lobby, the blast of air conditioning hitting my flushed skin. The receptionist, a woman with impeccable makeup and a headset, looked up as I approached. I expected a professional greeting, but as her eyes scanned my worn-out shoes and frantic expression, I saw something else. It was pity, a strange, uncomfortable pity that made my stomach turn. I'm here to see Julian, my husband. He forgot this, I stammered, holding up the laptop like a shield. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the elevators and then back to me with a look of hesitation. Of course, Mrs. Harrington, go right up, she said, though her voice lacked its usual polish. She buzzed me through. But as I walked toward the elevators, I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. It was a feeling I could not name, a subtle warning that I was walking into something I could not unsee. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt like an ascent into a different world. As the numbers on the digital display climbed higher, my ears popped, and the knot in my stomach tightened. When the golden doors finally slid open with a soft chime, I was greeted by a blast of conditioned air that smelled of expensive leather and ozone. This was Julian's kingdom. The office was a sprawling expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass, chrome, and white marble. It was sterile, intimidating, and breathtakingly cold. It was the physical manifestation of everything Julian craved: power, transparency, and a view that looked down on the rest of the world. It was eerily quiet. The reception desk was empty, likely due to the lunch hour, and the vast bullpen of desks stood vacant. The silence amplified my intrusion. My sensible, rubber-soled shoes, usually so quiet in the library, squeaked and clicked obnoxiously against the pristine marble floor. I felt like a stain on a perfect white sheet. I clutched the laptop case to my chest, rehearsing what I would say. I imagined his relief. I imagined him hugging me, perhaps even introducing me to his partners as the wife who saved the day. I reached the double mahogany doors at the end of the corridor. A silver plaque read, Julian Harrington, CEO. My heart hammered against my ribs. I raised my hand to knock, a smile already forming on my lips, ready to surprise him. That was when I heard it, a giggle. It was not a professional laugh. It was low, throaty, and intimate. And it was terrifyingly familiar. My hand froze inches from the wood. The sound was followed by a deep murmur, the kind of voice Julian used only when we were alone in the dark, or at least when we used to be. I stepped closer to the side panel of the office. The glass was frosted for privacy, but there were clear strips designed for aesthetic appeal. I peered through one of the gaps, and my breath caught in my throat. The image was fractured but undeniable. Julian was there, leaning against his massive oak desk. But he was not reviewing notes. He was not pacing in stress. He was holding a woman. She was wearing a dress the color of fresh blood, a vibrant red that burned against the white background of the office. Julian's arms were wrapped tight around her waist, pulling her flesh against him. His hand, the hand that wore the wedding band I had placed there 2 years ago, was buried deep in her blonde hair, gripping it with a possessive hunger he had not shown me in months. Then she turned her head slightly to whisper something into his ear. My knees buckled. The woman was Chloe, my best friend, the woman who had sent me a text message just 3 hours ago asking if I wanted to try a new coffee shop on Saturday because she missed me. the woman who critiqued my clothes and told me how to be a better wife to Julian. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. The strength left my fingers instantly. The heavy leather bag containing the laptop slipped from my grasp and hit the marble floor with a deafening crash. Thud! The sound was like a gunshot in the silent office. Inside the room, the two figures jerked apart. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to run, unable to breathe. I waited for the shame. I waited for them to scramble, to cover themselves, to look horrified that they had been caught. But they did not. Through the glass, I saw Julian look toward the door. He did not look scared. He looked annoyed. He let out a sharp, irritated breath, his shoulders slumping not in guilt, but in frustration. Beside him, Chloe did not even step away. She simply reached up and casually adjusted the strap of her red dress, which had slipped down her shoulder. She smoothed her hair. And then, to my absolute horror, she smirked. The door handle turned. Julian pulled the door open and stepped out. He loomed over me, his tie loosened, his lips still wet and swollen. He looked down at me, and then at the bag on the floor, and finally back at my face. There was no apology in his eyes. There was only a cold, hard fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. Are you stalking me now?" I stood there, trembling, my heart shattering into a million jagged pieces. I reached down and picked up the laptop bag with numb fingers, lifting it toward him like a peace offering in a war I had already lost. I didn't come to spy on you, Julian," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "You left this on the table. I knew how important today was. I thought I was saving you." Julian did not soften. He did not look relieved. He stepped forward and snatched the bag from my hands with such force that I stumbled back. He didn't check the contents. He didn't say thank you. He just gripped it like a weapon he intended to use against me. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed. Chloe stepped out from behind him, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. She draped her arm over his shoulder, her red nails digging into his suit jacket, claiming him right in front of my eyes. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust as she took in my beige cardigan and sensible shoes. "Oh, honey," she drawled, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Did you get dressed in the dark again? This isn't a community library. Elena, this is a place of business. You stick out like a sore thumb." I looked from her to Julian, waiting for him to defend me. He always defended me, but instead, he looked at me with the same disdain, as if he were suddenly seeing me through her eyes. "She's right," Julian said coldly. "Look at you, Elena, and look at her. I run a multi-million-dollar company now. I need a woman who can stand beside me at galas, who understands the market, who pushes me. Not a boring librarian who thinks a wild knight is reorganizing the pantry." The cruelty of his words knocked the wind out of me. "Boring, I supported you for 2 years while you built this. I paid the rent. I bought the groceries so you could put every penny into Apex Stream, and you—" I turned to Chloe, tears finally spilling over. "And you? We've been friends for 10 years. I held your hand when your mother died. How could you?" Chloe laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, grow up. Elena, business is survival of the fittest. I've been consulting for Julian for 6 months. The strategy pivot. The rebranding. That was me. We are a power couple. You were just placeholder furniture." "A safety net," Julian corrected her, his eyes hard. "You were safe. Elena, you were manageable when I was a nobody. But I've outgrown you. I'm flying first class now, and you're still waiting for the bus." I opened my mouth to scream, to rail against the injustice of it all. But a murmur behind me made me freeze. The elevator doors had opened. Employees were returning from their lunch breaks. They slowed down as they passed, their eyes darting between Julian, the glamorous woman in red, and the sobbing, dowdy woman standing in the hallway. I saw them whisper. I saw a few phones raised. Julian saw them too. His expression shifted from arrogance to panic. He couldn't be seen having a domestic dispute. He needed to be the victim. He needed to be in control. His face twisted into a mask of righteous anger. He raised his voice, pitching it loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I have told you 1,000 times. "It is over," he shouted, pointing a finger at my face. "Stop following me. You are delusional. I don't know why you can't accept that we are done." "Julian, what are you doing?" I whispered, horrified. "Get out," he bellowed. He turned to the stunned receptionist who had just returned to her desk. "Call security. Now I have a trespasser here who refuses to leave. She is harassing me and my staff, Julian. Please," I begged, reaching for his arm. He recoiled as if I were infectious. "Don't touch me. Just get this crazy woman out of my sight before she hurts someone." I looked around at the sea of faces. No one stepped forward to help. They just watched, judging the frantic woman in the cheap clothes who was ruining their CEO's afternoon. I was no longer his wife. I was the intruder. I was the problem. And as the heavy footsteps of security guards echoed down the hall, I realized he was going to throw me out like trash. 2 burly figures in dark uniforms materialized from the hallway shadows, moving with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a landslide. They did not ask questions. They did not pause to assess the situation. They saw a crying woman in cheap clothes and a shouting CEO in a bespoke suit, and they made their choice instantly. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. Now." The larger of the two grunted, his voice flat and bored. Before I could even wipe the tears from my cheeks, rough hands clamped down on my upper arms. The grip was bruising, tight enough to cut off circulation, treating me not like a human being, but like a dangerous animal that needed to be restrained. "No. Wait. I'm his wife," I screamed, my voice cracking as I tried to twist away from their hold. "Julian, tell them. Please. Tell them who I am. Don't let them touch me like this." I looked desperately into Julian's eyes, searching for a flicker of the man who had vowed to protect me, the man who had held me when I had the flu, the man who had promised we were a team against the world. But that man was dead. In his place stood a stranger with eyes as cold as the glass walls surrounding us. He watched the guards manhandle me with an expression of utter indifference, as if he were watching someone take out the trash. Chloe, sensing the finality of the moment, decided to twist the knife one last time. She stepped in front of me, blocking my view of Julian. With a slow, deliberate movement, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to Julian's cheek. It was not a kiss of affection. It was a brand. She pulled back and looked at me, her eyes dancing with malicious triumph. She had won. She had taken my husband, my dignity, and my life, and she was savoring every second of it. "Get her out of here," Julian commanded, turning his back on me to adjust his cufflinks. The guards hauled me backward. My heels dragged uselessly against the plush carpet as they pulled me through the open plan office. The silence from earlier was gone. The room was now buzzing with activity, but it was all stopped as I was paraded past. Dozens of faces turned to watch. I saw young analysts covering their mouths to hide giggles. I saw distinct flashes of smartphone cameras. They were filming me. I was going to be the joke of the day on their group chats. The crazy ex-wife who was dragged out of Summit Plaza? Let me go. "I can walk. I can walk myself," I sobbed, but the guards ignored me, marching me relentlessly toward the elevators. As the elevator doors began to slide shut, Julian's voice boomed down the hallway, loud enough for his entire staff to hear, ensuring my humiliation was absolute. "I am having the divorce papers sent over tomorrow morning," he shouted, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I want you out of my apartment before sunset. Do not think you are taking anything of value. Elena, you never contributed a single cent to that home. It is mine." The doors clamped shut, severing me from his shouting, but the words hung in the small metal box, suffocating me. The ride down to the lobby was a blur of nausea and silent tears. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the guards did not release me. They marched me across the polished lobby, past the horrified receptionist, and straight to the revolving doors. With one final, forceful shove, they pushed me out into the world. I stumbled, my feet tangling in my own legs, and crashed hard onto the concrete sidewalk. The heat of the New York summer afternoon rose up from the pavement, scorching my palms and knees. The air was thick with humidity and exhaust fumes, choking me. "And stay out!" one of the guards barked. A second later, my handbag came flying through the air. It landed with a sickening crunch a few feet away from me. The contents spilled out across the dirty sidewalk: my wallet, a tube of lipstick, a pack of tissues, and the small, silver-framed photograph of Julian and me from our honeymoon in Hawaii. I watched in slow motion as the glass of the frame shattered against the concrete. The picture, capturing a moment of pure, naive happiness, lay face down in the dirt, covered in shards of broken glass. I sat there on the hot ground, my knees scraped and bleeding, my hair a mess, surrounded by the debris of my life. Pedestrians stepped around me, their faces glued to their phones, indifferent to the woman falling apart at their feet. The city moved on, loud and uncaring. I looked at the shattered picture, then up at the towering steel monolith of Summit Plaza. It had taken exactly 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, I had walked in as a devoted wife bearing a gift. Now, I sat on the curb, stripped of my husband, betrayed by my best friend, homeless, and publicly humiliated. I had nothing. Absolutely nothing. The realization hit me not with a scream, but with a hollow, crushing silence that drowned out the noise of the traffic. I was alone. I picked myself up from the dirty sidewalk, ignoring the stinging pain in my scraped knees. I left the shattered photo frame where it lay, face down in the gutter, and began to walk. I did not know where I was going at first, just that I had to get away from the shadow of that building. My feet carried me instinctively to a small, quiet park a few blocks away. I collapsed onto an empty wooden bench, oblivious to the stares of passers-by who saw a woman with disheveled hair and torn stockings. I took a deep breath, the air trembling in my lungs, and wiped the mascara stains from my cheeks with the back of my hand. As the initial shock began to recede, a memory surfaced from the depths of my mind. Clear and sharp, I thought of my grandfather, the formidable patriarch of our family, on his deathbed. "Elena, money attracts parasites," he had wheezed, gripping my hand with surprising strength. Promise me you will live simply. Find a man who loves you for your soul, not for the Harrington name. Give it time. Test him." I had promised. I had taken that vow seriously. For the last 2 years, I had played the role of the poor, supportive wife perfectly. I lived on a budget. I clipped coupons. I let Chloe mock my clothes. I let Julian believe he was the sole provider, the king of his little castle. It was the ultimate test of character. I looked back toward the towering skyline where Summit Plaza pierced the clouds. Julian had not just failed that test. He had failed it with a spectacular, cruel arrogance. He thought I was a burden he had outgrown, a stepping stone he could kick away now that he had climbed higher. He had no idea that the stairs he was climbing were built on my foundation. My tears stopped. The sorrow in my chest did not vanish, but it hardened. It crystallized into something cold, heavy, and incredibly sharp. I was done grieving for a marriage that had been a lie. It was time to grieve for Julian, for he had no idea what was coming for him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cracked phone. I did not scroll to my mother's number. I did not call the few other friends I had. Instead, I dialed a number I had memorized since childhood but had not used in over 700 days. It rang only once before it was picked up. Hello, a deep, cultured voice answered. It was a voice that commanded boardrooms, yet now it held a note of hesitant curiosity. "Arthur, it is me," I said. My voice sounded different to my own ears. The wavering tremble was gone, replaced by a steeliness that had been dormant for too long. There was a pause on the other end, a silence filled with sudden recognition and profound relief. "Miss Elena, my God, is that truly you? We have been waiting for this call for so long." "Are you all right?" "No, Arthur." "I am not all right," I replied, staring at a pigeon pecking at a crumb near my shoe. "But I am about to be—" I sat up straighter, my spine stiffening against the hard wood of the bench. The librarian was gone. The submissive wife was dead. "Arthur, I want you to listen very carefully," I commanded, the authority flowing back into my veins as if I had never left the family estate. "I am ending the hiatus." "Reactivate my full inheritance status immediately. Unfreeze the accounts. Consider it done." "Miss Elena," Arthur replied instantly, the professional snap returning to his tone. "Is there anything else?" "Yes, I need a file. A complete dossier," I said, my eyes narrowing as I looked toward the financial district. "I want the deed for Summit Plaza. I also want every single loan document, investor agreement, and financial report regarding a company called Apex Stream. And Arthur, find out who holds their debt. Summit Plaza is one of your properties. Miss Elena. And regarding Apex Stream, I believe we hold their debt through the Aurora Fund. I will have the papers ready," Arthur said, his voice betraying a hint of grim satisfaction. He had never liked Julian. "Good. Pick me up. I am at the park on 4th and Main," I said. "The car will be there in 10 minutes, he promised. I hung up and placed the phone on my lap. I watched the traffic, counting the seconds. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 10 minutes later, a sleek black limousine glided to the curb, looking like a panther among the yellow taxis. It was long, dark, and radiated an aura of untouchable wealth. The driver, a man I had known since I was a child, stepped out. He was dressed in an immaculate uniform that made Julian's expensive suits look like cheap costumes. He walked around the car, ignored the curious looks from the people in the park, and opened the rear door with a deep, respectful bow. "Welcome back, Miss Elena Harrington," he said. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my cheap skirt, and lifted my chin. I stepped into the cool darkness of the car, leaving the weeping wife on the park bench forever. The limousine glided to a smooth stop beneath the gilded awning of the Harrington Imperial, a hotel that had been the jewel of my family's portfolio for over 60 years. The doorman, a man who had worked there since I was a child, opened the door before the wheels even fully stopped rolling. He did not blink at my disheveled appearance. He simply bowed low. "Welcome home, Miss Elena," he said softly. I swept past the lobby, ignoring the curious glances of tourists, and took the private elevator straight to the penthouse suite. The moment the doors closed, I stripped off the cheap cardigan and the skirt stained with the grime of the New York sidewalk. I threw them into the trash bin with a sense of violent satisfaction. They belonged to a woman who no longer existed. 30 minutes later, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, transformed. I wore a white tailored suit from a French designer that cost more than Julian's annual salary. It was sharp, architectural, and screamed power. My hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon, and the makeup artist I had summoned had painted my lips a deep, blood-red crimson. Arthur sat at the mahogany dining table, a stack of files spread out before him. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly behind his spectacles. "You look like your grandmother," he said, a note of pride in his voice. Report. Arthur, I said, sitting opposite him and crossing my legs. Arthur pushed a thick folder toward me. It is almost poetic. Miss Elena, the Summit Plaza, the very building where your husband plays king, is owned by a shell company under the Harrington Group. We are his landlords, and he is 3 months behind on rent. I opened the file, my eyes scanning the numbers. And Apex Stream. They are drowning, Arthur explained, tapping a balance sheet. Julian has burned through his initial funding. The meeting he is preparing for this afternoon. It is a desperate plea for a Series B extension from the Aurora Fund. He believes he is meeting a regional director to beg for $5 million to keep the lights on. And who owns the Aurora Fund? I asked, though I already knew the answer. You do. Arthur smiled, a thin, wolfish expression. You are the majority shareholder. He is begging you for money to save the company he used to humiliate you. Arthur then handed me a tablet. We pulled the security footage from the lobby of Summit Plaza, 10 minutes after you. Left. I watched the screen. The grainy footage showed Julian and Chloe standing near the elevators. They were not working. They were laughing. Chloe was reenacting my fall, miming a person stumbling, and Julian threw his head back in amusement, kissing her forehead. Bastards! I hissed, my hand gripping the edge of the tablet until my knuckles turned white. They are laughing at me. Arthur swiped the screen to change the image. It gets worse. We audited the company accounts. Look at these expenses. Last month, he withdrew $12,000 for client development. We cross-referenced the receipt. It was for a Cartier bracelet, the same one Ms. Chloe has been wearing in her social media posts. He is stealing from investors to fund his affair, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He is not just a cheater. Arthur, he is a criminal. Precisely, Arthur nodded. Now, about the meeting. It is scheduled for 3 p.m. I stood up, smoothing the lapels of my white jacket. Excellent, but before we go, I want to send a little warning shot. You know those credit cards he uses, the ones he thinks have a limitless ceiling, the ones you have been quietly paying off every month from your personal trust to keep his credit score perfect, Arthur asked knowingly. Cancel them. I ordered coldly. Every single one. Report them as stolen or lost. I want his next transaction to be declined. I want him to feel the first crack in the ice before I shatter the whole lake. Consider it done, Arthur said, tapping a command into his phone. I walked to the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with a rhythmic, military precision. I was no longer the weeping wife on the curb. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Let's go. Arthur, I said, checking my reflection one last time. My husband is waiting for a meeting with the owner of the building and his biggest investor. I would hate to be late. I stepped back into the elevator, descending from the clouds to bring a storm down upon the man who thought he could destroy me. I was returning to Summit Plaza. But this time, I would not be entering through the service door. I was coming in through the front, and I was going to burn his world to the ground. I watched the live security feed on the tablet resting on my lap, my heart beating with a cold, steady rhythm. Inside the glass office that I had effectively paid for, Julian and Chloe were popping the cork on a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. They were celebrating a victory they had not yet won, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already turned into quicksand. To us, Julian said, raising his glass with a smug grin. To the new era of Apex Stream. Once we secure this funding, the world is ours. Chloe clinked her glass against his, her eyes gleaming with greed. And to getting rid of dead weight. You deserve someone who shines as bright as you do. Darling. Just as Julian took a sip, his phone buzzed violently on the mahogany desk. He picked it up, frowning at the screen. I knew exactly what he was seeing. It was a notification from the restaurant downstairs where they had ordered a lavish lunch. What the hell? Julian muttered, his brow furrowing. Transaction declined. That's impossible. I have a limit of $50,000 on this card. It's probably just a bank glitch. Babe, Chloe said dismissively, running a hand down his arm. Don't let it ruin the mood. You can scream at them after you close the deal, Julian nodded, shoving the phone into his pocket. You're right. I'll fire whoever is responsible for this inconvenience tomorrow. The mood in the office shifted as the clock struck 3. The representatives from the Aurora Fund arrived. They were 3 men in dark gray suits, carrying leather briefcases, and they did not look like they were there to hand out money. They walked in with stone-faced expressions, ignoring Julian's outstretched hand and taking their seats around the long conference table in silence. Julian faltered for a second, his confidence wavering slightly at their icy demeanor. Chloe, sensing his hesitation, stepped in close. She straightened his tie, her fingers lingering on the silk knot. Relax, she whispered, loud enough for the microphone in the room to pick up. They are just playing tough. You are a genius, Julian. We are going to get that money, and then we are going to buy that villa in the Hamptons. Just imagine the parties. Julian took a deep breath, puffing out his chest. He was about to speak when his secretary hurried into the room, looking pale and breathless. Mr. Harrington, she stammered. There has been a change. The regional director isn't leading the meeting. I just received word that the chairman of the Aurora Fund and the owner of Summit Plaza is coming to attend personally. Julian's eyes widened, and a flush of excitement crept up his neck. He turned to Chloe, his ego inflating instantly. Did you hear that he asked? His voice trembling with delight. The chairman personally. They must know. They must know how big this IPO is going to be. They are coming to shake my hand. Of course they are. Chloe preened. With renewed arrogance, Julian walked to the head of the table. He reached into his bag and pulled out the silver laptop, the very same laptop I had rushed to bring him, the one he had snatched from my hands without a thank you. He placed it on the podium and connected it to the main projector. Gentlemen, Julian announced to the silent investors, tapping the keyboard, prepare to be amazed. My presentation will explain why Apex Stream is worth every single penny of your investment. The room remained deadly silent. The investors did not open their notebooks. They simply stared at the door. He is here, one of the investors said softly. The heavy double doors of the conference room swung open. The sound of heavy boots thudded against the floor as 4 massive bodyguards in black suits marched in, forming a protective corridor. But it was the sound that followed that made the air in the room freeze. Click, click, click. The sharp, authoritative sound of stiletto heels striking the marble floor echoed like hammer strikes. Julian and Chloe craned their necks, trying to see past the wall of broad-shouldered security guards, confused by the rhythmic, feminine sound coming from the entrance of the mysterious chairman. Who is that? Julian whispered, squinting against the glare of the hallway lights. The bodyguards stepped aside in perfect unison. I stepped out from behind the wall of black suits, the silence in the room instantly shifting from anticipation to a suffocating shock. The stark white of my tailored suit blazed against the dark wood of the conference room, a blinding contrast to the beige cardigan I had worn just hours before. Around my neck, the Harrington star, a diamond necklace my grandmother had worn to meet queens and presidents, glittered with a cold, hard fire under the fluorescent lights. I saw the recognition hit Julian's face like a physical blow. His jaw went slack, and the color drained from his skin until he looked like a wax figure. Elena, he stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. What? What are you doing here? How did you get in? Where is security? I told them. I told them to keep you out. He looked frantically at the bodyguards, expecting them to grab me, but they stood like stone statues, their loyalty clearly not with him. Before Julian could make a move, Arthur stood up from his seat at the table. He buttoned his jacket with a slow, deliberate calmness that commanded attention. He looked at the confused investors, then at Julian, and finally bowed his head slightly toward me. "Gentlemen, Mr. Harrington," Arthur announced, his voice projecting clearly across the room. "It is my distinct honor to introduce you to the chairwoman of the board. Please meet Mrs. Elena Harrington. She is the sole owner of Summit Plaza, the building we are currently standing in, and the majority shareholder of the Aurora Fund." The air in the room seemed to vanish. The three investors from Aurora immediately jumped to their feet, buttoning their jackets in respect. Julian, however, stood frozen. He blinked rapidly, a nervous, jagged laugh escaping his throat. It was the sound of a man whose reality was fracturing. That is ridiculous," Julian scoffed, looking around the room with wide, manic eyes. "This is a joke, right, Elena? Did you hire actors? Is this some kind of sick, twisted revenge prank because I dumped you?" I did not answer him. I did not even look at him. I walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture, the scent of my expensive perfume filling the space between us. I reached the head of the table, the seat reserved for the most powerful person in the room, and sat down. I smoothed the fabric of my trousers, interlocked my fingers on the mahogany surface, and finally raised my eyes to meet his. "Sit down, Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a gavel striking a sounding block. "You are wasting my time. You have 5 minutes to convince me why I should not bankrupt you right now. Start." Chloe, who had been standing by the window, suddenly surged forward. Her face was twisted in an ugly snarl, her earlier confidence replaced by a feral desperation. "This is a lie," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "She is a fraud. She is a broke librarian who buys her clothes at charity shops. She is lying to all of you, Julian. Tell them she is nobody." One of the bodyguards took a single step forward, blocking her path with a massive arm. "One more word, ma'am, and you will be removed from the premises," the guard warned, his voice low and dangerous. Chloe choked on her words, shrinking back against the wall, her eyes darting between me and the investors who were now looking at her with open disdain. Julian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at the investors, seeing their expectant faces, and realized this was not a prank. He turned back to the podium, his hands trembling violently. He reached for the connector cable to plug into the laptop. It was the same silver laptop, the one I had clutched to my chest in the taxi, the one I had rushed here to deliver because I loved him. Julian's hand shook so badly he could not align the cable with the port. He stabbed at the side of the machine once, twice, 3 times, the metallic scratching sound echoing in the silent room. He looked at the laptop, and then he looked at me, the realization finally dawning on him. He remembered how he had snatched it from me. He remembered chasing me away. I leaned back in the leather chair, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "What is the matter, Julian?" I asked softly, tilting my head to the side. "You seem nervous. 3 hours ago, you told me I was useless. You said I was a burden. Do you remember?" He stared at me, sweat beading on his forehead. "Well," I continued, my voice hardening into steel, "it seems that the useless woman you threw out on the street now holds the life of your company in her hands. Plug it in, Julian. Show me what you are worth." Julian tried to salvage the situation. He let go of the laptop cable and took a step toward me, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. The arrogant CEO vanished, replaced instantly by a desperate husband playing his final, losing card. "Elena, baby, please," he wheezed, forcing a trembling smile that looked more like a grimace. "I know you are upset, but But we are family. You are my wife. My darling wife. We can talk about this at home. Can't we? Don't do this in front of the partners. Please. I stared at him, my expression unmoving, feeling absolutely nothing for the man who had ordered security to drag me out just hours ago. Home, I asked, my voice flat. You ordered me to vacate your apartment by sunset. Remember, I turned to Arthur and nodded. Arthur tapped a key on his own tablet, overriding the connection to the projector system. The massive screen behind Julian flickered to life. Since you are having trouble connecting your laptop, allow me to assist, I said. Julian turned around, expecting to see his sales projections. Instead, a massive spreadsheet appeared. The rows highlighted in angry red. Next to the data were high-resolution photos of receipts and bank transfer logs. What is this, one of the investors asked, leaning forward and squinting at the screen. This, I declared, my voice cutting through the room like a knife, is where your seed capital went. It did not go into research and development. It went into the pocket of the woman standing next to him. I pointed a laser pointer at the screen. The red dot landed on a specific line item. Item 1, $12,000, labeled as server maintenance. Actually, a diamond bracelet from Cartier. Item 2, $8,000, labeled as team building. Actually, a weekend trip to Cabo for 2. The room erupted. The investors slammed their hands on the mahogany table. This is embezzlement, one of them shouted, his face turning purple. This is fraud. Chloe turned a ghostly shade of white. She instinctively covered the diamond bracelet on her wrist with her other hand, but it was too late. Everyone was looking at it. It was the smoking gun, shining under the fluorescent lights. No, that is a mistake I can explain. Julian stammered, sweat pouring down his face like rain. There is nothing to explain. I interrupted, standing up, as the chairman of the Aurora Fund. I have seen enough. We are officially withdrawing our offer. Not a single penny from my family will touch this company. Julian gasped as if I had punched him in the gut. He looked at me with wild, terrified eyes. But without that $5 million, we can't operate, he cried out. We will fold in a week. I am not finished, I continued ruthlessly. As the owner of Summit Plaza, I am invoking the morality clause in your lease agreement. Criminal activity on the premises is grounds for immediate termination. You are evicted. Effective immediately. Julian grabbed the edge of the podium to steady himself. His legs were giving way. And one last thing, I added, delivering the final blow. I reviewed your personal loan documents. Julian, you leveraged your personal assets against your company stock to fund your lifestyle. Since I just pulled the funding and the lease, your company is now worthless, which means your stock is zero, which means you are personally bankrupt. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian looked at me, his eyes hollow, realizing the magnitude of his destruction. He had not just lost a deal. He had lost his career, his home, his reputation, and his money. All of it, gone in a single afternoon. He sank into the chair behind him, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently as the reality crushed him. Chloe, watching the man she thought was her golden ticket crumble into dust, made her calculation instantly. She stepped away from him as if he were burning. She shoved his shoulder hard, nearly knocking him out of the chair. You liar, she screamed, putting on the performance of her life. You told me you were rich. You told me the company was solid. You tricked me. She turned to me, her eyes wide with fake tears, clasping her hands together in a plea for mercy. Elena. Oh, Elena, thank God you found out. He manipulated me too. I am so sorry. I can help you fix this. I know where he hides the other files. We are still best friends, right? I looked at her, feeling nothing but cold disgust. Stop talking, I commanded. You are fired from your consulting position, and I will personally ensure that every firm in this city knows you helped embezzle funds. You will never work in this industry again. The room was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit. Julian, the man who had towered over me with such arrogance only hours before, slid off his chair like a melting candle. He did not stand. He did not fight. He dropped to his knees, his expensive suit pants sliding against the carpet as he crawled toward me. His face was a mask of snot and tears, the facade of the powerful CEO completely shattered. He reached out, his trembling hands clutching at the hem of my white trousers. "Elena, please, you have to understand," he sobbed, his voice cracking into high-pitched, desperate squeaks. It was the pressure, the investors, the market. I was so stressed. It wasn't me. It was her Chloe. She seduced me. She twisted my mind. She made me think I needed her. "Elena, baby, I love you. I only love you." I looked down at him. I searched my heart for anger, for hatred, or even for that old, lingering love I had held onto for 2 years. But there was nothing. It was like looking at a stranger, or worse, a bug that had been crushed under a shoe. He was not a monster. He was just a small, weak man who had sold his soul for a little bit of gold paint. I leaned down slowly, bringing my face inches from his. He stopped crying for a second, his eyes widening with a flicker of hope, thinking I was going to embrace him. "You said something earlier." "Julian," I whispered, my voice soft but deadly cold. "You said I didn't fit into your world. You said we weren't a match. I didn't mean it. I swear." "I didn't mean it," he stammered, shaking his head violently. "No, you were right," I continued, cutting him off. "But you got the reason wrong. We aren't a match, Julian. Not because I am below you. It is because I am in a league that you could never, ever hope to reach in 1,000 lifetimes." I stood up straight, shaking my leg to dislodge his grip. I looked toward the door where the security team was waiting. They were the exact same 2 guards who had bruised my arms and thrown me onto the sidewalk earlier. They looked pale, terrified that I would fire them next. I raised a hand and pointed at the weeping couple. "Get them out of my building," I ordered, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "Immediately, and search them before they leave. They do not take a pen, a file, or a paperclip. If it belongs to the company, it stays here." "Yes." "Ma'am, right away." "Ma'am," the lead guard shouted, eager to please his new boss. They marched forward. The larger guard grabbed Julian by the back of his suit jacket, hauling him up like a rag doll. The other grabbed Chloe, who was trying to hide under the table. "No, get your hands off me." "Do you know who I am?" Chloe shrieked, kicking and scratching. "You are a trespasser." The guard grunted, tightening his grip. They dragged them toward the door. Julian's feet scrambled uselessly against the floor, his expensive Italian leather shoes scuffing the marble. "Elena, Elena, please, don't do this," Julian screamed, his voice raw with panic. I watched as they were hauled out into the open office. The staff, who had been whispering about me earlier, now stood in stunned silence. Then, as the screaming couple was dragged past the cubicles, I saw the phones come out again, but this time, the cameras weren't pointed at me. They were filming the downfall of the tyrant and the mistress. The heavy doors swung shut, muffling their screams until they faded into nothingness. Silence returned to the conference room. The investors looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of victory. It tasted clean. I looked down at the table. The silver laptop sat there, the screen still displaying the evidence of Julian's crimes. I reached out and lowered the lid. Click. The sound was sharp, final, and deeply satisfying. It was the sound of a chapter ending. I picked up my designer handbag and turned my back on the empty chair where my husband had sat. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sun was beginning to set over New York City. Painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, I walked out of the room, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind in the dark, stepping forward into the light of a future that belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really hope you enjoyed this dramatic journey. Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from right now. I would love to connect with all of you and hear your thoughts on Elena's revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and please smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people. See you in the next video.